Hello, I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly video. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. We had been hoping that this Friday today, 22nd of October, would be the Freedom Day, when all the remainder of the government health restrictions would be removed from Irish churches. Now, sadly, that is not the case. As you know, there's been an considerable increase in the number of cases, the number of hospitalizations, the number of people in ICUs, and the number of people dying. And so the government has slowed down. They're not rolling anything back. They're not moving backwards with the restrictions, but they are slowing down the removing of the restrictions. So where do we stand at this moment in time with religious service? Well, so let's start with the good news. The good news is that all numerical limits have now been removed. Up until today, churches were asked to keep to 50% of their capacity. That limit has now been removed. So there is absolutely no limit on the number of people you have in a religious church service. Now, by the way, when it says religious services, and this is a query, we at EAI, we've been handling a few queries from churches that really do want to comply with the legislation and just trying to get their heads around it. People ask, well, is this just church buildings? No, it's a religious service. And so whether that religious service is in somebody's home, or whether it's in a rented community hall or a hotel building, or whether it's in a designated church service, these are the rules for religious services. There is no limit, no numerical limit anymore. You might say, but yes, distancing, obviously distancing, that can be a cap itself. Well, the 2-meter distancing, that has been what has been relayed to us from the Taoiseach's office, is we should encourage congregations to spread out as much as possible. There's a realization that opening congregations up to more than 50% capacity means that it can't always strictly comply with a 2-meter distance. So now the advice we're hearing from government is distance as much as you can, encourage congregations to spread out as much as possible. For example, in the church that I pastor in Drogheda, what we've done is, instead of having our children and our youth in for the worship, the children's activities and the youth church start at the same time as the main church service, which has reduced our numbers and means we can still have our seats spaced out considerably. And by running 2 services, we can accommodate everybody that's wanting to come to church, and we can also still have people feeling safe. Because the fact is, a lot of people, and this is purely from a pastoral standpoint rather than a legal compliance standpoint, a lot of people aren't ready to go into church and jam shoulder to shoulder with everybody else like they used to. And we don't want anyone to feel unsafe when they come to church at all. So congregations are to be encouraged to spread out as much as possible. Now, face coverings are still to remain. We are told by the government that we are still to wear face coverings in church services. I know this is something that a lot of people don't like doing. I was really hoping I could announce to our church in Drogheda that the masks would be gone, but we're still going to be wearing masks this coming Sunday. So face coverings are still continuing for now, according to the government. Now, of course, sanitizing and ventilation are important, so we need to make sure we still have the sanitizing machines there and good ventilation. Now, for singing, choirs and soloists, before we were told that they had to be 4 meters away from the congregation. But now the latest advice from government is that choirs or soloists should be 2 meters away from each other, and also 2 meters away from the congregation. Now, one other thing that we do get a lot of inquiries about is about teas and coffees, because obviously a lot of churches serve tea and coffee after their church services. And people have been asking us, well, where do we stand with that? Given that, for example, cafes and restaurants have to have a vaccine pass system, what about churches? Well, we do recognize now, we've not actually raised the issue of teas and coffees at church services with the government. I don't think they actually understand the concept at all. I wouldn't imagine that any of the cabinet members or members of NIFET attend a church where people share tea and coffee afterwards in the church building. But it is an important part of many evangelical churches, the fellowship that we spend together on a Sunday. And so we've not raised the issue with government on this, because in case, basically not understanding it, they come out with something ridiculous or draconian. But we do recognize that where people are gathering for a purpose other than food, very often food is permitted. So for example, with a hotel, if you're a guest in a hotel, whether you're vaccinated or not, you're still able to eat in the hotel. Same thing, people attending cinemas can still buy food and consume that food when they're in the cinema. So we don't anticipate that there's going to be any problems with churches serving tea and coffee. It's a very different animal, that, to an actual restaurant. And so in the church I pastor, for example, as from next week, we will be serving tea and coffee between our services. And we don't expect that there's going to be any difficulty in that. We're still going to do it as safely as we can, but it's part of our fellowship, and moving on, it's something that we are going to do. Now, of course, it's the reason why we're observing these safety things is not just because the government tells us to do it, but because we want to protect people. And I would just urge every church member and every church leader to continue to practice our faith as safely as we conceivably can. You know, we do need to be aware that if, for example, a church was to ignore the government instructions, let's say about face covering, that may well have ramifications for your church insurance as well. Your liability insurance, you may find, does not apply if you have deliberately not complied with directives from the government from a health standpoint. But even aside from that, I just want to say this as a pastor. If I made a decision in our church and somebody got sick or, God forbid, died as a result, getting sued or getting prosecuted would be the last thing on my mind. The prime concern would be I would not want to live with the guilt that I would feel if my actions and my flaunting of government guidelines were to cause grave sickness or death to one of the people that God has placed me as a pastor to care for and to protect. And so we all look forward to the day when these restrictions will be removed. I was hoping it was going to be today. It's going to be a bit longer. But I would just urge every church out there, please, let's practice our faith. Let's practice it well. We look forward to a better future, but let's stay safe and stay blessed in Jesus' name, because it might be Friday, but Sunday's coming.